we were meditating, and I think for the first time, I really released. I didn't fall asleep, but I released all thought, and I was really in that moment. And when I opened my eyes, I was like, oh, that's what everyone talks about.
I feel like in my forms, that's something I can practice on my own, right? I mean, you guys probably agree, right?
Sure.
And which helps me like in controlling my body and movement and understanding the movements that I can use in my fighting. But the only way I can apply that in fighting is having someone like you guys throwing to me and me seeing how your body reacts after I've made contact with you, right? Because everyone moves differently.
Absolutely.
Right, Sifu?
Yeah.
I 100% agree. I like my forms to help me teach my body how to move. When I'm doing my forms, I'm practicing the movement. So in my mind, I picture an opponent. Each time I'm doing a movement, is that a block? Is that a strike? Where am I striking? But I can't actually put that in. I can't say I can fight if I've never actually had another body throwing to me or me having to use those movements that I practice in my forms. I have to do that on the body. Because like you said, everyone moves differently, people are different sizes, and then it actually can even help me understand deeper the position I should be in when I'm doing my form to actually make it work if I were using it in fighting.
Certainly in forms, a person, you can stress yourself and work with your balance and work on your movement and work on your individual coordination in the art, certainly. But you can't work on coordination of the totality of your art just in doing forms, largely because, as you mentioned, Sifu Sandra, you have to have that interplay with somebody else, and as you mentioned, Sifu Julie, you have to have a certain amount of resistance and size, right? So me attacking you versus Sifu Sandra attacking you is going to produce a different result, a different movement. You're going to have to use a different level of force, right? All of those things you can't read from just doing forms. You have to get those from interacting with another person, and that's the next level of coordination and training. And then the third thing I would say about coordination and training is the fact that if you're only doing forms, you may be stressed at the physical level, but you're not stressed at the mental level, and you're not stressed at the emotional level, right? Because you don't have that experience of, oh my God, this fist is coming at my face, or oh my God, this kick is coming at my groin, what do I do, right? You don't have that thought process or that emotional swell of chemical release in your body and have to deal with all of that and handle the attack and then handle your technique and handle your emotions and your mentality associated with that. So I think it'd be almost impossible to learn how to fight in just doing forms because you don't have all those different levels that you play with.
An example of that is if I'm practicing something at home and it's from my form and I'm doing it and I'm imagining my partner, I think like you were saying, and then I come in to do it and it goes awry. It's like it doesn't work, and then I have to say, okay, I'm not sinking, I'm not using my levers, and that is the beauty about having the pressure, right? That's the only way that's going to make it work is with a training partner.
Right.
Right.
And the only way I can see in your mind thinking if you're a form teaches you how to fight is if you're doing it in the realm of where the opponent is not doing anything but standing there and you're doing things to them, even if you're putting the moves together, which in our form, it's not meant to be done. Technique doesn't have to be done in the order of the movements. You can break it up, mix it around. But if your partner is just standing there and you're hitting targets, it might seem like it would work. But we all know from our village fighting that when you are in contact with someone else, their body responds to that contact, which changes maybe where your next strike will be. You have to, and everyone moves different, so I might have planned in my head I'm going to do this move, but then their body moves another way, and I've got to be able to adjust on the fly and continue my attack. So in my head, again, the form, I love forms. I love practicing our Hankai-ken form in particular, and I love how it teaches my body how to move. And I love how I find the circles and how I can do it in a Tai Chi form, how I can do it in a combative form. But I take that information, and then when I'm doing my village fighting, I remember the basics that we're learning as we do our form to use to make sure that when I'm with an opponent, that what I'm doing works.
Yeah. There were two things you just hit on that made me think of a couple of things. I really like animal form, and what I like about animal form is you have to constantly change and represent each animal with each movement, right? So it goes in line with what you're saying about people move differently. And as a bigger person working out with smaller people, you can't hit the smaller people as hard as you can hit a bigger person, right? And as you're saying, everybody moves differently. So you may think you're going to move one way in a form and you're imagining your technique and it looks great and it's wonderful, and then all of a sudden you come and do it, and because there's going to be tons of different real life scenarios. There's the drunk person in the bar, there's the person who's really trying to take your life, there's the person who just wants to mess around, right? You can't deal with all those people the same way and go, just kill them. You have to use differing levels of force, and the only way you're going to know how to adapt to those scenarios is doing the things, starting with form and getting yourself coordinated and getting your balance, and then realizing once you're interacting with somebody else, like you guys were saying, is everybody moves differently. So you have to be able to adjust all those form movements on the fly as you assemble them into a technique.
I just want to say another thing. Just one more thing. The breath control, because I struggled with breath control when I started, and it took me a long time to regulate that, because I was a shallow breather. And so I can breathe with control in my forms. It helps me, but there's nothing like having the depth of what you learn from breath control when someone is coming at me to maybe take my life. That you have to learn how to harmonize, and that's when you learn the depth of breath control. At least that's my experience.
Right, and it's much harder to use your breath control in the moment of the actual village fighting than it is to use it in your forms. And because there's a lot more going on, and that's that, the pressure is on, you've got someone coming at you, and then sometimes we forget everything we learned, and you just go into some ridiculous move that you're like, okay. I'm going to answer only because I feel like, as far as that, I'm in order of people who've worked on that, I think I'm the least between the three of us who've worked on that actively. I think it's just happened naturally, because I can say at this point now, I definitely can look at situations both, and I'm going to say more outside of here, and I don't find frustration. I mean, I'm human, so sometimes you get aggravated at things, but I have a much calmer way of looking at situations, looking at people. I work with a lot of different people, and seeing how they respond to the world around them, and how I have learned to go, well, some from the Sifu about, it always reminds me that worrying is a waste of time. And I've worked on that a lot, but also in our system, when we learn, and we've all done this at our level, we've all done this, where you're in the moment and you're under the pressure and you are able to release everything but what you're doing. So we call that no mind. And at Sifu, I don't know if that's the right way. That's how I see our Zen, because we'll be out there on the floor, maybe having attackers come at us for 2, 3, 4 minutes. When we're done, we can't remember what we did. We know we addressed everyone.
Yeah.
We know some things might have gone well, some things didn't, but if someone were to say, oh, show me that move you did, oh, I don't remember. Because we are in the moment and we're just focused on what we're doing. We're not thinking, I'm going to take this arm and move that. We just have to move. You have to respond. So, and we call that no mind, and we've all experienced it. And when you experience it for the first time, it is quite amazing. And you're like, wow, I can't remember what I did until you watch a video.
Yeah, the video doesn't
And
work.
then you're like, ah!
Well, Sifu said it for years, right? Be present, be present, be present. And I think that's in line with what you're saying about when you're doing it combatively and you're really doing it from a martial perspective, you have to be no mind. There can't be anything on your mind. I equate it to when I ride motorcycles, right? It's so dangerous all the time. You have to be present in the moment, paying attention to what you're doing. But simultaneously, when you look at, I have Sicilian blood, so I'm hot-blooded, tempered all the time, right? So I have to work on managing that. But when you look at the art and the thing that always impressed me about the art and how the art has developed over the millennia is there's so many layers, and you have to manage everything on every single layer. And that to me is kind of the zen of it, is you have to get all the layers to work together for it to be effortless and flow and no mind. And you get to a point where if you trained hard enough in your forms and your base and your fundamentals, you get to the point where you can put building blocks together, you can put concepts together and move them around through your technique and through your training without really having to spend a lot of effort doing it. I mean, I struggled with, you guys know, I struggled with everything was just raw, when I started out, and all the way up to blue, right? even at Blue, I was gassing out from just fighting hard all the time until I learned how to balance that out and rely on the concepts and the techniques and all the different layers of the art rather than just going hard all the time.
I practice, like a lot of people think that having Zen or Chan in Chinese is just sitting in a meditative stance or seated position. I practice my Qigong like regularly and my Tai Chi and my internal training, but there is a difference. That's challenging too for people's minds to slow down, but it's become a practice for me. But as a village fighter, we all know that it's the consistent training under pressure in here, and all of that mind, that calm, no mind like you're talking about, that's what ends up coming out on the floor. And Sifu calls it like the avatar state, you know, where you are just in that zone. I get chills thinking about it actually, because we only know that through experience. And that's from,
Yeah, right.
I mean, I've fallen down many times and gotten up and like redone my techniques and that, but when I'm in that state, it is just the no mind, and that is Chan or Zen. That Mark.
And we know when we're not in that state.
Yeah.
And I can even catch myself when I'm overthinking and trying to anticipate. And when you do that, everything falls apart.
Yeah.
You just have to go here and whatever is coming to you, you receive it and deal with it. You can't anticipate what it's going to be, or I'm going to do this. Whenever I've done that, I'm going to do this technique forever. It goes awry because then they throw something that is totally off what I was expecting.
Right.
So I
Well,
have to
like,
just.
like what both of you keep referring to the training, right? And that's where I think you can only get the Zen or the Chan, like you were mentioning. There's people that sit around, you know, and they think they're going to get there that way, or sit in a hot yoga room and bend themselves into 16,000 different positions. I don't think that's the path, right? At least that's not been my experience. My experience has been that the path is transformative, and it's come from the training like you guys were referring to. You have to start by stressing yourself physically, then you kind of mature out of that, and then you stress yourself mentally, then you start to mature out of that and you stress yourself emotionally, then you get to the point where you're almost a black sash and you start to blend it all together, and you can start to manage all your states simultaneously. And that's, I think, at least for me, that was my path to getting to Chan Zen and using that and getting to the no mind concept in Kung Fu. But you have to go through the steps. You can't just think, oh, I'm just going to jump to the emotional. No, it doesn't work that way. There's a specific process.
Yeah. I mean, Sifu used to always say that this translates outside, and I didn't touch on that. I talked more about on the mat. But all of the struggles, whatever, the tears, you know, everything,
The
the
blood.
no mind, the Chan, that repetition of the training, as we all know, that translates to outside of here, and that's in dealing with the angry driver, the angry person, diffusing a situation, learning how to breathe properly through everything. You know, that's what a martial art is supposed to do, and that's what I think that's huge that I've learned that at the village.
Well, Steve O'Brien, you brought up an excellent point, which I know this now, after you said it, it makes sense, but when we have people come in here and they want to master the Zen before they've come through the ranks, as you said, those are building blocks. You can't, if all we did was sit and meditate, and then Sifu had 10 people throw at us, and we hadn't worked through all those others, that Zen would go out the window. But because
Absolutely.
we've been put under that stress and failed many times, and then tried it again, and then, because to me, the end where we are now is where we can put it all together, and where we can just, you know, now we, even when we sometimes meditate after class, because I've struggled with the meditation, my form of meditation in my life is a little different than just sitting there like this. I have my meditative moments every day. I do it. It's just not what would be considered the definition of meditation. But for me, it's my meditative part of my morning. But in class recently, I think I mentioned it to Sifu, we were meditating, and I think for the first time, I really released. I didn't fall asleep, but I released all thought, and I was really in that moment. And when I opened my eyes, I was like, oh, that's what everyone talks about. But it took me a long time to get there.
Yep.
So you can't do it the other way. You were saying you've got to start, and you've got to work on each piece, And then when you get to that end, whether it's black sash for me, I think it was closer to Sifu, that then it's like, oh, it all makes sense.
Which takes us back to your first question about forms.
Yeah.
And you have to go through
Yeah,
all
yeah,
of that in order to really understand the depth of your form.
Yeah.
And we say it all the time, the whole journey is about, at least from my perspective, and we've talked about this a number of times, the whole journey is about getting to the point where you're comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because if you, God forbid, if you ever have to use the skill for a life-saving situation, it's going to be massively uncomfortable. So to find that chan, that zen, that balance in that moment to be able to survive it and survive it well, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable and just deal with it.
Show me number 3 and 4.